And it is a bright and sunny autumn day here in the Midwest. The Cubs have won their way into baseball glory. They're on the verge of actually participating in the World Series right here in Chi-Town, which will, I'm sure, become an obsession that will be overwhelmingly nauseating after a certain amount of time. But nonetheless, Chicago is filled with a sense of self-gratification. We finally have done it. How are you this morning, Stephen?
I'm doing really well, Chris. It's a nice morning here. I've been to, I think, 1 or 2 baseball games in my entire life, so never been hugely into that. But
yeah, for me, you know, the only motivating element in a baseball game in my mind is that a lot of these stadiums now have world-class cuisine, and so, you know, because baseball bores me beyond belief.
Yeah, I remember that was one of the few things I remember about going last time is the food. It was really good, but really expensive.
Yeah, but you know, it's that pay to play, which is the theme here on planet Earth. You got to pay to play across the board, everywhere you go.
And even with this, I think it's even more expensive here, that the price we pay to do this. So
yeah, it does kind of, you end up in a chute being led down into the throes of the slaughterhouse. But you know, once you get to the point where you're starting to wake up from all this, then you can look at that and laugh at it and recognize that all of the grief and all of the gore never really happened. And even though that sounds pretty insane and people really rebel at that idea, that is in fact reality. So you will awaken, and it will be a bright, sunshiny day, and you will be surrounded by an experience that you will remember once you step into it as having been glorious and is a continuance of that glorious experience.
Absolutely. Couldn't have said it better than that. So we're going to start up today with lesson 68 and continue on to lesson 74. So if anyone's joining or watching the video, feel free to follow along in your workbook, and we're going to start going through it.
Absolutely. You want to take the first one here?
Sure. So lesson 68 says, love holds no grievances. You were created by love like itself. You who were created by love like itself can hold no grievances and know yourself. To hold a grievance is to forget who you are. To hold a grievance is to see yourself as a body. It is the decision to let the ego rule your mind and to condemn the body to death. That's a pretty big statement. Just to start off in that first paragraph there is to, well, the first sentence actually, because you were created by love like itself, and love can hold no grievances. Do you want to take it from there, Chris?
Okay, well, I think the thing that's really getting amped up here as we're looking at this next series of lessons in our lesson book is that there is nobody else here. There is only one of us. And, you know, there's that song out there from a few years back, What If God Was One of Us? And that really is the reality of it, is that we are so intimately joined with our Creator that there is no discernible distinction between God and us. And in truth, all of those, what, 7+ billion of us on the planet are in fact one being. And this is a real area where we can snafu ourselves, because the minute you attack or hold a grievance against somebody else, who is that boomeranging back to? See, that's coming right back to your own doorstep and it's sitting there for you, kind of like well, back in the day. I remember the big thing at Halloween time was kids would get gunny sacks and fill them with cow manure and douse a little kerosene on them and set them on fire on somebody's doorstep and ring the doorbell and run away. And that's kind of like what happens when you attack or condemn or push away even somebody else around you. So, you know, one of the things I see is, oh, you're a toxic person and get away from me. And you really need to start looking at that more deeply, because whatever dysfunction in your mind is creating this sense that somebody else is toxic, you haven't discovered that same essence within yourself yet, because there's where it truly resides. And the people around you are just reflecting back to you all of those elements within yourself that you haven't been able to embrace and to bring into light and to bring into love. So that whole idea of grievances is very, very, very important as we continue to progress with these lessons, because we realize that there is no difference, there is no separation, and we are all part of that one being.
Oh, absolutely, yeah. And it says this line, to hold a grievance is to see yourself as a body. I mean, that is when you see yourself solely as a body, a human body, then you're choosing to see yourself as one of those fragmented pieces out of the 7 billion people, instead of seeing that you're that oneness that we all share.
Exactly. As we scroll down or look, you know, further down in the text here, there is an affirmation that is given to us, and it tells us to look at all, thinking of, you know, all these different people around us. It says, I would see you as my friend, that I may remember you are part of me and come to know myself. My God, that is so deep and yet so incredibly stupid simple. And yet we just over and over again step out of that level of consciousness and end up pushing away people. And every time we do that, every person that is pushed away is a rejection of ourselves. So we create our own tragedy.
Mm-hmm. Oh yeah, and for this, I would say, you know, this is a huge step, because oftentimes it can take a big process of letting go of that grief we might have held on to. Maybe it comes out in the form of tears, or maybe it'll come out in laughter, maybe it'll come out in joy or sense of peace. Because I mean, sometimes we hold on to this stuff really subconsciously, the sense of grief in our relationships.
That's very true. I've witnessed that myself. Absolutely. You're spot on with that. The other thing is that as you start to look at ideas like this and really try to embrace these thoughts, sometimes there is a settling in where all of a sudden you're just not triggered by the things that people used to do that would really tick you off in the past. And that, I think, is in itself is a major gain from looking at A Course in Miracles as a study process and as a way to live. Because all of a sudden you're not having that adrenaline rush and wanting to smack somebody upside the head. It just tones things down to the point where you get into a deeper level of acceptance. And, you know, that acceptance is what enriches us. It's what takes us to a much higher level.
Oh yeah, that's a good thing to remember during this political season, I would say, too, with all the talk of Donald Trump and Hillary. I'm sure a lot of people are feeling different ways right now.
Oh yes, and you've got to add Putin in there too now, because we got the evil Russian bear sniffing around on our doorstep looking for that gunny sack of manure to toss around and create even more havoc in this world, which is really, if you take any of this seriously, it's just going to make you ill. And as soon as you can begin to forgive and step back and release and not allow it to impact you, wow, the amount of power, the amount of vibrancy, the amount of a desire to live comes rushing in. So stop and notice that every time you're in a state of hostility and self-protection, there's a good chance you're diminishing your own energy too, and you're not operating fully up to speed.
That statement actually flows really well into our next lesson here. Do you want to read it off, Chris?
Okie dokie. Lesson 69, my grievances hide the light of the world in me. No one can look upon what your grievances conceal, because your grievances are hiding the light of the world in you. Everyone stands in darkness, and you beside him. But as the veil of your grievances is lifted, you are released with him. That's what I love about the way the Course works. It's, again, it takes us back to that recognition that there's really only one of us here. And the only person who's going to benefit from all of our effort is us. So then it goes on to say, share your salvation now with him who stood beside you when you were in hell. He is your brother in the light of the world that saves you both. And this goes back again to that idea of Jesus. Whether you believe in Jesus as an actual physical individual who lived 2,000 years ago, or as a metaphor for something greater, really when you start looking at it from the level of where we exist, there is no truth in this world at all. So no matter how you define anybody who is here, oh, this person was real, that person wasn't real, it's all completely irrelevant, because ultimately this is the manifestation of the Holy Spirit, of the Christ consciousness coming back into your mind. So it doesn't matter if Jesus walked the earth 2,000 years ago. All of the stories of Jesus, all of the things about Jesus that we embrace and that we recognize as being profoundly true, is this message that is coming through from our higher self, from the Christ within us, trying to get us to awaken to this bizarre reality that we have created. So it's all wound up in ideas. And when you start looking at hard physical realities, when you start relating to physical bodies, then you're stumbling off the path. But when you begin to realize all of these things are ideas, and all of these ideas exist within your mind, starting to turn that process around and climb out of the pit.
Oh yeah, absolutely. I think that's said really well. And I think also it can be really shocking when we start to awaken to different levels of our own mind and start to become more aware of those subtler levels, as we were talking about before, because we start to see the unreality of things around us, the things that we previously might have believed in so much and placed so much emphasis and so much energy into believing. Those things just start to disappear, and we start to, and actually might be kind of shocking at first to see how unreal they are.
Yeah, you actually end up feeling like, you're floating at times. You feel like you're in limbo because you had built a platform or a foundation based on tangibility. If you can see it or smell it or hear it or touch it or taste it, it is not real. And that is a real difficult obstacle to get around initially when you're starting to practice the Course, is the realization that all of this is in flow, it's always fluctuating, it's always changing. The things you had for breakfast today, tomorrow could be, something you have a bad reaction to and discover that you've developed an allergy to. I mean, everything is always bouncing around like 10,000 ping pong balls inside one of those air tent things that kids jump up and down in. And that's what makes it so confusing, is because we very cleverly hid the truth so completely and thoroughly from our conscious awareness that we get stampeded by all these physical sensations. And, that causes us to step out of our serenity. That causes us to step out of our peace.
Absolutely. This lesson, even, I want to say, in terms of the light of the world being within us, I mean, that light is unchanging. That light is the truth of who we are. And so anything that shows up, like our shadow self, or the darkness, or things in this physical world that we see and taste and touch and smell, those things that are unchanging are illusory because they don't have a basis in reality. As soon as the light comes, it immediately diminishes all those things.
It literally nothingnizes them.
Nothing.
When we go around to this fifth paragraph, it says, "From where you stand, you can see no reason to believe there is a brilliant light hidden by the clouds. The clouds seem to be the only reality. They seem to be all there is to see. Therefore, you do not attempt to go through them and past them, which is the only way in which you could really be convinced of their lack of substance. We will make this attempt today." So this is what we're trying to do, is we're trying to break through this fog bank that we have created for ourselves and finally arrive at a place where that light is starting to just finally break through in it. From my experience, and I think from a lot of other people's experiences, it is a process where, as you continue to work with this practice and retreat within, close your eyes, experience that serenity, all of a sudden you'll get little flicks of light. There will be little sparks that will occasionally show up, and that will begin to intensify. So it is an actual experiential process that we go through, and you will see the signs of your efforts, because every once in a while in your meditation there will be this little flash, and sometimes that flash will be more extended, and then it gets to be much bigger, and eventually you get that real emergence into the experience of joining that light, of being becoming one with that light.
Yeah, there's a line here that goes along really well with what you're saying. It says, "If you are doing the exercises properly, you will begin to feel a sense of being lifted up and carried ahead. Your little effort and small determination call on the power of the universe to help you, and God himself will raise you from darkness into light. You are in accord with his will. You cannot fail because your will is his."
That is perfect, yes. And the little affirmation further down here that we're given to work with, "My grievances hide the light of the world in me." Boy, that's kind of a boomerang that is painful. "I cannot see what I have hidden, yet I want it to be revealed to me for my salvation and the salvation of the world." So, once again, everything is always turned around. It's always circular. Every effort you put into doing something for yourself, you get the benefit of, but so does everybody else in the world. And everything that you do to extend yourself for those around you has an equally powerful and positive effect on the collective of the sonship that we're participating in.
Absolutely. Here we move on to lesson 70, which says, "My salvation comes from me. All temptation is nothing more than some form of the basic temptation not to believe the idea for today. Salvation seems to come from anywhere except from you. So too does the source of guilt. You see neither guilt nor salvation as in your own mind, and nowhere else. When you realize that all guilt is solely an invention of your mind, You must also realize that guilt and salvation must be in the same place. Understanding this, you are saved.
That kind of draws a line in the sand for us. In other words, your only way out of here is the way that you embrace, because it comes through you. It's not somebody else arriving at, like a knight in shining armor to rescue your ass. Yeah. You are stuck with this world until you drag your butt out of it. And that really, I think, is something that a lot of people get caught up in, is that expectation that you can allow, this presence or this avatar to come in and change your life on your behalf, because it doesn't happen that way. You have to change your mind, and within that you create this region of receptivity where God comes through you. God becomes manifest within you. So there is, within our practice, we recognize that whatever ego we're maintaining in this world, whether it's our own ego or aspiring to a higher, more evolved level of the ego, the ultimate ideal is to embrace that ego that was Jesus, which was, a presence that created no chaos, a presence that created no judgment, a presence that created no negativity as it passed through this world. And that's, that's the way home. But you're the one who's in control of that. And a lot of people struggle with that because they're of the belief that somebody's going to change their mind for them, and they don't have to do any of the work.
Yeah, and I think it really exemplifies the stark contrast between the idea of our relationships with people in this world and where our responsibility lies. Because the Course talks so much about relationships with other people, or, the people who are reflections of us. And I think those people can be reminders. They can, the Holy Spirit can work through those people to help us remember, but they're still not going to do the work for us, as you're saying.
Right. And we are so inclined to make things contingent upon physicality. I have a lot of clients who get very frustrated with the reality that their prosperity is not their salvation. And, people say, oh, how am I going to live? I don't have rent money for next month. Well, the truth of it is that you created conditions, consciously or unconsciously, where you blocked yourself from having the resource, because all of it comes from within you. So your abundance is something that's inside you. You have to get in touch with it. But we've created all these different ways of blocking ourselves from our own good, of giving ourselves a limitation, of crippling ourselves as we walk through this material world. And that, sadly, is something that most people are not really inclined to let go of. They hold on to that. They make themselves miserable, and they run into the same brick wall every month at the end of the month, trying to scrape up money for rent for next month, or food for next month, or whatever.
Yeah. And as real as that may seem, I want to read off that this last part of this lesson, which says, "My salvation comes from me. Nothing outside of me can hold me back. Within me is the world's salvation and my own."
Yes, that definitely, again, gets us away from our ego self to the recognition that every time you allow a miracle to occur within your consciousness, when you allow that release of holding grudges and keeping yourself blocked up or blocked in, then it rocks the entire world. I mean, that's the cool part about it, is that every time you forgive, the world may not be consciously aware of it, but the world is rocked by that event. And wow, talk about power. You know, Hillary and Donald, they're aspiring to the presidency. They don't know what power is, because their little empires will eventually crumble. But the truth is, the peacemakers, the people who practice forgiveness, the people who are like Mother Teresa, they're the ones who are making the actual changes occur in the material dream that we're having.
Yeah, because they're in touch with something that's beyond the material dream.
Exactly. Well, now we're up to lesson 71. I like this one because, again, you know, it diminishes our ego and it validates our true self, our Christ consciousness. It says only God's plan for salvation will work. You may not realize that the ego has set up a plan for salvation in opposition to God's. It is this plan in which you believe. Since it is the opposite of God's, you also believe that to accept God's plan in place of the ego's is to be damned. This sounds preposterous, of course. Yet after we have considered just what the ego's plan is, perhaps you will realize that however preposterous it may be, you do believe it. And again, the ego's plan, the second paragraph here, the ego's plan for salvation centers around holding grievances, holding on to the past. It maintains that if someone else spoke or acted differently, if some external circumstance or event were changed, you would be saved. So this is getting back to that idea of, oh my God, I need $50 to make my rent, and I need $100 to, you know, fix my car, and yada, yada, yada. Those are all distractions. God's already got the perfect plan for you. And if you will just set an acceptance, you will have that inclination, that realization, oh, I need to go here and do this to resolve these little material issues, and they will be resolved. But the big thing is that you can't get committed to fixing things with money, fixing things with, you know, justice in this world. I'm going to bring this guy into justice. I'm going to sue his ass and get rich and go live on an island in the South Pacific. All of that stuff, all you're doing is just reinforcing your own ego. And that is the one thing that at the end of the road will abandon you. That is the sorry outcome of all of our cherishing our egos. Because every time you protect that ego, it is going to take another chunk out of you at the end of the day.
Yeah, that reminds me of what we were talking about before we started this video too, is that when you're operating from the ego, I mean, it has us believing in lies, right? That's what its existence is based on. So the accuracy of the thoughts that we're believing is not going to be very high at all if we're believing what the ego is saying.
Right, and that's, again, that's why in political situations and in, you know, human interactions in general, we all see this is a good person and that is a bad person. I'm going to vote for Hillary because Trump is evil, and I'm going to do this because somebody else is evil, and you know, and we've got to make somebody pay for their transgressions. All of this is a scripted show that we are watching, and if you actually start paying attention to it, you'll start to realize that there are good and bad elements in every person that comes into our surroundings. So, you know, for so long, President Obama was severely criticized by the right and highly praised by the left. And now all of a sudden people are starting to kind of cross boundaries, and people over on the rights camp are starting to say, oh, well, Obama's not that bad. And people on the left-hand side of the street are going, oh my God, he sold us out. See, and you'll find that everywhere. You will find that everywhere in this world. You will not escape that, because this world is a lie. And the lie is based on what? It's based on condemning our brothers, which, because there is only one of us here, self-condemnation. You're condemning yourself over and over and over again. So we have to look at things with a higher level of lucidity and step out of that fight or flight and attack mode and move back into a place of serenity where we can discount what we are being told by our senses and begin to embrace that truth. And if you ask to see the Christ in those around you and you patiently work at it, you are committed to doing that, then the light will start coming through from everybody around you. You know, in the Course it talks about the great rays. And this has been described by avatars in all different disciplines. Being able to see humanity, and within each individual person, seeing the great rays, that light that comes from the divine. And that so far outshadows the shell of their ego that all of a sudden you're lifted into a higher way of life. So that's the beauty of the way the Course works, is it gives us actual tools to work with to be able to experience this world in a much, much different way.
Yeah, and I think I'm just sort of intuitively feeling that you'll feel a lot lighter too once you do start to perceive people that way.
That is a fact, yes.
Is there anything else you wanted to add to lesson 71?
No, I think we're ready to roll on into 72.
Okay. 72 says, holding grievances is an attack on God's plan for salvation. And I really appreciate here how the language is very direct. It's very clear that it is actually like an attack. It's an act of, it's an act of vengeance, of hostility on God's plan to hold a grievance. And it says, while we have recognized that the ego's plan for salvation is the opposite of God's, we have not yet emphasized that it is an active attack on his plan and a deliberate attempt to destroy it. In the attack, God has assigned the attributes which are actually associated with the ego, while the ego appears to take on the attributes of God. And then it says, the ego's fundamental wish is to replace God. Even says, in fact, the ego is the physical embodiment of this wish.
Well, that kind of puts a kibosh on the idea of capital punishment, doesn't it? I mean, that's the highest level of justice that we imagine can be attained, or at least a lot of people who are somewhat misguided. It's like an eye for an eye and a tooth for a tooth. If you hurt me, I'll go wound you. And if you kill my dog, I'll kill your dog. And it just gets bloodier and uglier. And obviously God, who is love, would not be the perpetrator of this kind of madness. So it really isn't that difficult to look at things and be able to discern what truth is. But ultimately, it's not only God's plan that is being attacked, but it is God himself or itself or herself, however you want to look at it, that is that you're imagining that can be attacked. And then that spawns all kinds of other madness trips where people are out there fighting for God. Get out the streets and let's fight for God. And of course, God is going, oh, well, maybe not so much.
Right, because, God doesn't fight. God doesn't have even the capacity to attack, because it would take him away from perfection.
It would be the spoiler against love. It would say that love can turn into hate. It can become, you know, a vehicle whereby we are condemning and ultimately destroying each other. And that is the ego's mission, even though ultimately the ego's only outcome is to destroy itself. But the ego, unfortunately, is not willing to look at that.
Yeah, it says, for it is this wish which seems to surround the mind with a body, keeping it separate and alone, and unable to reach other minds except through the body which was made to imprison it. The limit on communication cannot be the best means to expand communication, yet the ego would have you believe that it is. So in the ego's mindset, having a body, which is a limit on communication, is the best way to expand communication. But what Jesus is saying here is that that's not the case.
Yeah, that's very true. And one of the things that I was heavily influenced by in my childhood was my grandfather, and he was a very powerful presence. And he was a very quiet man. He did not go into a crowd and start blithering and blabbering. You would find him not aloof, not separate, but in his own quietude, participating with everything just by his presence. He would accept everything around him. He would become a part of his surroundings. And you see this a lot in Native American tradition and probably a lot of other tribal traditions where it's actually, you know, considered ill-mannered to chat it up and yak it up like our current prevailing society is inclined to do. But when you get a group of people together and you just are that quiet but present attendee, you're all of a sudden feeling all of these connections that go much deeper than the words, and all of these reasons to forgive those around you. You can sense the pain that other people are carrying with them, and you can reach out to them in your silence and give them grace. So it's very interesting how, you know, this whole process continues, but the more we draw within ourselves and keep our silence with us and carry our silence and practice our silence, the more profound the impact you will have on those in the circles that you're participating with. So as you move through the world, be more the observer and less of the aggressive communicator. And you'll discover that you leave peace in little chunks behind you. Whereas a lot of people, they leave turmoil and chaos and blah, 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 you know. And again, that goes back to ego gratification. You don't have to get your ego the strokes it needs. Be silent, be observant, be humble, but at the same time, know that you are the source of light for this world. You are powerful beyond belief in the true reality that we exist in.
Yeah, I think that leads in really well to the next lesson too here, lesson 73. Do you want to take that one?
Sure. Okay, lesson 73, I will there be light. And today we are considering the will you share with God. This is not the same as the ego's idle wishes, out of which darkness and nothingness arise. The will you share with God has all the power of creation in it. The ego's idle wishes are unshared and therefore have no power at all. Its wishes are not idle in the sense that they can make a world of illusions in which your belief can be very strong. But they are idle indeed in terms of creation. They make nothing that is real. So we're being drawn to that idea that the ego suppresses our true nature. It's just what I was talking about. We are the light of the world. We can bring into this world forgiveness, acceptance, and grace. We can bless people We can share peace with people just by our presence. And by staying in our presence, we step out of our ego. We step out of that need to be the reactionary person. We step out of our need to beat a drum or take up a cause or change the world. Because let's face it, we've got, 10,000 years of recorded history and nothing has changed. It has been war after war after war. It has been murder and rape and destruction and death. And it's not going to change. That is simply not what this world was created for. You have to really be realistic about this. This world was created to be a place of crucifixion. And the story of Jesus gives us a very, very clear example of that. That one soul that does absolutely nothing to warrant an attack of that level is one that is crucified. And in the midst of that story, in this goriest of possible outcomes, with all the blood and thorns and these hideous images, Jesus is on the cross saying, "Forgive them." The ego would be on the cross saying, "Come down here, God, and kick their ass for me." But we see, where this idea of the Christ, this idea of the peacemaker, has so much power, is because in the midst of all this hideousness, love is the only thing that it will embrace and that it would extend or share with those around it.
Yeah, absolutely. That's such a great example too. I mean, to have the worst possible scenario happen, being whipped and flogged and, having yourself hung on a cross. I mean, and he still was in that state of awareness where he wasn't holding anything against anyone. He was in complete forgiveness and complete awareness of God's plan for salvation, and he came back. So that's pretty amazing.
That is pretty glorious. Absolutely. Yes. And, it again is, God is not going to lead you down that same path. That's not what practicing the course or practicing the path of love is all about. You're not going to be thrown off a cliff and experience that same outcome. The whole idea is that was a very dramatic lesson that was given to us as the exemplar for how we should conduct ourselves in this world. That doesn't mean that you have to be crucified, but it does mean that you have to let go of that ego. And as that ego imagines itself being crucified, it will wail and whimper and scream and holler. So, bring along some popcorn and get ready to laugh at the theater that we enter into as we disassemble our egos.
Yeah, and it totally feels really real. It will try all its persuasion tactics.
Yes, and especially creating imagery around us. We've created a world filled with communication devices, and every time you turn on television, there is a bloodletting. It is just so rife throughout our culture. And if we're practicing peace, perhaps it's good to step away from the media. Perhaps it's good to step away from having to contest those illusions over and over and over again, and to work in your own private way to bring peace to the world.
Absolutely. So here we go on to our last lesson for today, lesson 74, which says, "There is no will but God's." And it says, the idea for today can be regarded as the central thought toward which all our exercises are directed. God's is the only will. When you have recognized this, you have recognized that your will is His. The belief that conflict is possible has gone. Peace has replaced the strange idea that you are torn by conflicting goals. As an expression of the will of God, you have no goal but His. that's really humbling, I think, because it really pulls us in the right direction away from all our other worldly pursuits and all our other meaningless pursuits that we engage in on a probably daily basis.
That is absolutely true. And the thing that is interesting about this passage is it highlights the thing that keeps us stuck. You know, when we believe that our ego's will is real, that it has some content to it, that it has some gravity and some magnitude, then we really place ourselves in that space of duality. So that's why passages like this that are scattered throughout the course are so important, is for us to realize that our true will is God's will, and that there is no other will in existence. So the idea of the ego's will is just a mad idea. It's silliness. It's absurd, but it generates all of this conflict where we're attacking ourselves. So the more we practice this idea that there is no will apart from God's will, the more we diminish or detach from the ego's desires. And that's when we start to be carried through those rough spots. That's when we start to experience the miraculous in truest sense of the word, which is the grace and forgiveness and love that is always a part of God's will for us.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and it really seems that the ego's will is always just to simply be in conflict. Its will alone is just to kind of wrestle with itself, you know, and just keep that battle going on and on as long as it can. But, you know, God's will is completely unified with itself. So it's never fighting against anything else. It's just always, it's invulnerable, so it doesn't need to prove itself.
Exactly. And the only obstacle to God is the one you created, called me. And the more you're willing to let go of me, the more you are restored and reinstated in that presence that God is.
Yeah, absolutely. And you know, sometimes that's too much ecstasy and peace for our ego selves to handle, but it's what we really want nonetheless.
It is. And sadly, we have to take it in small doses until we develop not only a tolerance for peace, but a desire for peace in the strictest sense. And that takes us away from that desire for revenge or justice or, you know, leveling things out, because then it just sets the stage. Well, you killed my dog, I'll kill your dog.
Yeah, absolutely. None of those justifications really ever measure up.
That's true.
So that was our last lesson for today. So we're going to pick up next week. Feel free to like, share, comment, and anything else you want to add, Chris?
Not really. It's a spectacular time of year here in the Chicago area, throughout the Midwest, actually. Sumac and sugar maple and all these different plants and trees around us are brilliantly scarlet and orange and bright yellow. And so I think I'm going to go outside and look at the leaves and enjoy their change before they leave.
Oh yeah, that sounds great. And we have a Halloween coming up a week from today too. So the season of masks and disguises, maybe it will help us become more aware of our own disguise.
That's perfect, yes. And if anybody wants to join us with their Halloween costumes, you know, we will definitely be able to accommodate that. And we do have trick-or-treats for people who are looking for sweet delights from the Course in Miracles.
Excellent. Well, we'll pick up again next week then on Halloween, and you have a great week.
You take care, and keep the bunnies and chickens separated there, and life will be good.
We will. All right. Thank you, Chris. Have a good week.
Take care. Bye.